Hi everyone, and welcome to our 8th or ninth, I've lost track, webinar on educators supporting educators with ISS. Today we're really excited to be helping you connect with some of the teachers that we know who have been working really hard with math and science. We've got elementary, middle school, high school, combination, a little bit of everybody here to help us and to help us figure out how to best put together online learning within our context areas. You'll notice that you've got a couple different options today. So we have the chat, and in the chat, if you're going to post, please post to all panelists and all attendees so everyone gets to be able to see your information. And say hi, tell us where you're coming from. We're super excited to have you here today. We're going to start off today by talking about first, what is effective learning and how do we build community within our context areas? And then we'll be looking at some strategies and procedures for teaching math online with primary students. Then we'll be looking at math with secondary students. Then we'll be looking at science with primary students, then secondary with science. And then we'll be looking at how do we figure out what the fall is going to look like after students have had such a some disjointed learning and a different type of learning experience. Then we'll open things up to the Q&A and we'll go from there. To get us started, I'd like to introduce you to our fabulous panelists today. So I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie. Stephanie, will you introduce yourself to everyone?
Hi everybody, my name is Stephanie Havel. I am currently a middle school grade 6 science teacher and a K-12 instructional coach at Korea International School. This is my 5th year as an international teacher and my 11th year as a teacher of science, and I just love all science. So I'm glad that everyone could join us today.
Great, welcome. And Lauren.
Hi everyone, I'm Lauren Bowers. I'm at the American School of Dubai, and up until this year, I've been a classroom teacher at the high school level. I've been overseas for about 10 years and started off by teaching in Texas, around the Dallas area. And now I am a K-12 science instructional coach at the American School of Dubai.
Fantastic. And Jill. Oh, you're on mute. There you go.
Hi everyone, I'm Jill Broderick and I teach grade 7 math at the American School in London. This is my 6th year of teaching internationally, but my 11th year of middle school math. Aside from math, I also do an 8th grade elective called STEMinar, which is a little bit of science, engineering, and math. And I also work on computational thinking at our school for K-12.
Wonderful, and welcome. And Andrew?
Hi, Andrew Harnett. I'm in Hong Kong. I work for Hong Kong International School. I've been teaching internationally for 13 years now. Right now I'm teaching grade 3. I'm going to be shifting grades next year, but I've taught a mix of grade 3, 4, and 5. And I'm one of the people that kind of is in charge of math for my grade level and have been for a couple of years.
Wonderful. And Emry?
Hi, my name is Emry. I'm from Sumatra, Indonesia, and currently repositioned to Texas during this wonderful time. I've been a teacher for 17 years, internationally for 5, and I have the great opportunity to be in 2 roles during this time as a parent of an elementary student as well as a middle school student, and obviously a middle school teacher, math teacher.
Wonderful. Welcome everybody. And I just want to do a shout out. We also have my wonderful colleague Laura Benson. Laura, want to say hi real quick?
Hi everybody, we're so grateful to have you with us. Yay for math and science.
Yeah. And we've got my colleague John Burns in the background who's helping us take care of all the technology issues. And I'm Dana Watts. I'm the Director of Research and Development at ISS for International School Services, located in Princeton, New Jersey at the moment. So welcome everyone. To get us started right away, so our first question is, how do we ensure effective learning and build community and confidence within our context areas online? Lauren, would you like to get us started with that question?
I'm actually going to share my screen because one of the things that I think can help with being a a little bit more effective is using what you have at home. And this is just literally, I'm looking at a box with some books with my iPad connected to my computer. And I'm just going to use this as a manipulative right now to show you how to make things a little bit more effective. So these three things here represent the content you're teaching in your class, or the things that are the things that students have to learn as they are exposed to new content. This is all the distractions, and this is them expressing their mental or creating mental models to go into long-term learning. And so to make something more effective for students online is doing your best to really reduce those distractions here. And hopefully throughout answering all these other questions in this next hour, you might get some ideas of how to reduce those extra distractions as much as possible in order to make their learning more effective, in order to create mental models. And sharing your screens and doing manipulatives is one way of making that effective online.
Wonderful, thank you. Stephanie, did you want to add on to that?
Yes, one of the biggest things I think to get kids ready to be able to shift and get away from the distractions is to meet them where they are. That's been the most powerful thing that I have seen in this past 10 weeks. Is if it's only having a kid type in the chat whenever they respond for 3 weeks, that's awesome. And I had one of my students did their first speaking in class today on call, and it was amazing. And just meeting kids where they are and remembering that giving them a safe space online is just as important as creating a safe space in the classroom, whether it's for science or math or whatever we're doing.
Oh, that's such a fantastic message. Thank you. And Anne-Marie, did you want to add to that as well?
Yes, when we began our journey, I actually tasked the kids with something that had nothing to do with math or science or actually any subject area. And it was teaching them how to learn something new in this new venue. And so I gave them 2 days to learn a new task, whether it was juggling or learning a TikTok dance or something like that. Just one, to break the ice, because I know this is a very stressful time for everyone, especially our kids. And afterwards, they had to reflect on how did they learn what they learned. Was it watching multiple videos? Was it pausing the video? Was it talking to somebody else? Was it reaching out to an expert? What was it? And like you said, meeting the kids where they were, and but also giving them an opportunity to learn how to learn during this time.
That's so important. Jill, did you want to also contribute there?
Yeah, sure. I think something that we all recognize is that their social interactions are what they've lost in this whole pandemic. Especially, it's really focused on in the lower school or elementary, because students are learning socialization. But also thinking about secondary schools, kids are losing their whole connection to their lifeline, right? They've already learned how to socialize, and now they crave it. And so we're asking them to become little adults and sit at a desk all day. And so the more and more you can create experiences for students to be doing something physical or collaborative, the better. It's really easy to fall back on lecture and kind of go back into that old school method of teaching, but we have to remember that we don't need to reinvent the wheel, but spend our time building activities that kids are going to stay engaged and offer opportunities for them to reach out and do something physical, or talk to a friend in a chat to do something for your lesson. Anything that gets them kind of away from the rote work of worksheets or documents.
I think that's so important. I think that, this is so new for so many teachers and for students, right? And we tend to, when we're nervous or we're doing something new, we go back to the way that we used to do things. And I've seen that just with my own kids, with some of their teachers as well. And I also want to make sure that all our teachers know that there's a slew of resources out there. If you feel confident, find a couple that you feel really confident in and focus on those, and then expand out, because it just really helps you as well, and it helps our students, right? They all have different ways and they're getting all these different messages from different teachers. Our next question is really, it's about what are some of the best practices and strategies for teaching math online with primary students? And Andrew, do you want to get us started with that question?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so when we were thinking about the approach, because we started this back in February, and we were kind of going, all right, well, we're a standards-based school. I'll clarify that right off the bat, and we're pretty big. We've got 10 classes in every grade level. So we kind of had to figure out a balance of how could we ensure the standards were delivered, but at the same time, not overloading the kids, not overwhelming the kids. So one of our first best practices was we had to look at every unit of math and go, what do we absolutely need to do? And then how can we deliver that in a variety of ways? One of the things we do consistently is there's a math video every single day, but there isn't work that needs to be turned in every single day. It's actually we only require one thing from math every week to be turned in. And what that is varies and changes. So one of our priorities was don't overload the kids. We encountered that through a learning curve. And the kids I teach in particular, the third graders, they're 8 years old, but all of grade 3, 4, and 5 in my division only have one turn-in per subject per week. And so that makes things a little bit lighter for them. So they get a chance to explore things and kind of really engage with the learning without having the pressure of, I need to take a photo of this and get it onto Google Classroom or Seesaw or whatever method the teacher has, one of the methods the teacher has chosen to ensure it. We also try to mix things up in terms of what is done in the videos. So some videos are follow-alongs where they might have to cut or manipulate or shift things that we've provided to them. Or they might be straight up, this is a conceptual understanding thing. You need to know what the array model is in multiplication. A few times we've done pre-videoed Zooms with other kids so that the video of the day is actually a taught lesson with other kids that the rest of the kids in class see. So they get to see their friends on the screen as part of the video, which ends up being a really high engagement thing. And then you often do silly engagement things. Like I created something called the Math Mouse, which has a very, very annoying voice to one or two people who hear that character a bit too often. And I use that character to kind of just introduce the learning standards. And so sometimes you just need to make it a little bit silly to grab their attention. And that's kind of how we've been approaching things. We've tried to do a mix of paper pencil depending on how it went with the concept versus hands-on manipulative.
Fantastic. Does anyone else want to jump on there? Okay, we'll move on to secondary math. And so the next question, just so you know too, we're going to talk about math first, then we're going to talk about science, and then we're going to move into more general open Q&A because they see questions coming in for different pieces. So we'll be talking about those as well. But first we're going to, first we're just concentrating on math, and then we're going to move on to science. So for question number 3, what are some of the best practices or strategies for teaching math online with secondary students? Jill, would you get us started with that question, please?
Yeah, no problem. I think it's so important, again, kind of bouncing off of what I had mentioned earlier of creating really engaging lessons for students without kind of killing yourself and trying to do so much and worrying too much about, are they busy all the time? So I think the first thing is less is more. In secondary, there is a lot of work across the board. And even though math and science are the most important, we have to recognize that they are unable to get through the same amount of work that they would in a school day. With that, I think it's important to offer a menu of work. So if you are from a standards-based school, what are some different strategies or different activities you can offer them that will kind of meet that standard that you would be okay with them choosing one or the other? And so usually for me, I'll give a menu that has sort of some prereq work that might be a little bit of background, some review. We'll have a main lesson that's interactive, and that would be through Pear Deck, and I can talk about that in a minute. It's a Google Slide add-on. And I might offer a Desmos activity. And then I'll also offer an enrichment piece. So something from UCubed, a rich task, or I'll offer something from Enrich. And then I'll also kind of back it up with something from Khan Academy. So again, I'm not spending time recording lectures. There's so much out there already. So if kids need that procedural work, it already exists on the internet. So I'm going to send a link to them and they can always do that as in the background. But I really want to focus on having really engaging tasks. And so I like to develop my own, and I create interactive lessons in Google Slides, and I use Pear Deck as an add-on. I have a website that I have a walkthrough of how to do some of these things called Goodbye Notebooks that I think will be linked. But it just really kind of helps me with formative assessment because I can see all of their work. If I use Desmos, they have feedback, so I can give feedback right in Desmos. And just really just giving opportunities for them to really engage. I also think it's important to collaborate. So we use breakout rooms all the time. So students are still doing that group work in Zoom. So some lessons are, even though we work kind of in tandem, some of our lessons are synchronous and some are asynchronous. But when we have that synchronous opportunity, it's not to walk through and just kind of lecture. It's more about having students continue that discovery of lessons. And finally, because I know I'm going a little bit over, really trying to reach out to our colleagues and try to build some interdisciplinary work. So we've been really lucky that we've already kind of made this something part of our middle school, our 7th grade, where we work with social studies. So we look to see how does social studies has a project about creating change. And so math is tagged onto that to say, well, data helps create change. And so we kind of pulled in and they've created questionnaires in social studies where they've asked questions and we've come in and said, okay, great, let's do an analysis on that. And so students are seeing the real world and recognizing how our lessons and our subjects are all interconnected.
Wonderful. Oh my gosh, thank you so much. And we put a bunch of the resources over on the side if you haven't been able to, in the chat, and we'll also be sharing those afterwards. And we threw Jill's website that she talked about is also on there as well. Anne-Marie, did you have some more that you wanted to talk about as well?
Just briefly, Jill pretty much covered a lot of great ideas. The only thing I would add on there is just reminding ourselves as teachers to be flexible through this whole process, that it does take a little bit longer for our kids to learn online when we're not all in the same classroom together, and keeping that open-mindedness with the kids. And like Jill said, being flexible with how we're going to allow the kids to show what they know, giving them choices and showing and learning a new topic, as well as showing what they know, whether it's creating a video or Google Slides and collaborating. And, don't try to recreate that, sitting in a room with a test kind of scenario, coming up with some other ideas for our kids to show what they know.
I think it's so important too to be able to, some of us have different access to technology, but using breakout rooms, being able, I know, being able to use just Google and having them collaborate on a document if needed and things of that nature. There's a lot of different resources, or sending them into a breakout room so that they can work in smaller groups, because in the big groups, sometimes it's so overwhelming and our voices tend to get silent sometimes, because it's hard to know how to interject, even in a group of this size, right? It's hard to know when do you just jump in and when do you wait to get called on, which can be intimidating for our students. We're going to move on to our next question, which is really about teaching primary students with science. So for question number 4, what are some of the best practices and strategies for teaching science online with primary students? Andrew, why don't you start us off with that one, and then we'll move on to Lauren.
Absolutely. I actually collaborated with one of our science coordinator at our school, Wendy Smith, who is amazing. And if she is on this, you are amazing. So I just wanted to send that out there. But we were kind of going with the idea of we have to focus the home learning activities on performance expectations, so our students aren't just doing isolated one-off science activities. We really focused on the science and engineering concepts, the core ideas and cross-cutting concepts that where that was in the science. And we also kind of made sure that the students were doing things that anyone could access. For example, we recently did one in grade 3 called the ramp roller experiment, which literally they had to create a small ramp and roll a round object down it on various surfaces. And so it's the idea of friction and, you know, strong, hard, like tough friction versus light friction. What are the distances they traveled? A very easily accessible activity to all the students, given that we don't know what resources they have access to and what resources they don't have access to. And then there were some expectations in terms of recording data and doing multiple trials. So you're still getting the same concepts, the same core ideas that you would be getting in the science lab or in the classrooms, but just in a more accessible way at home. And that was kind of one of the big things we were going with. And then those ideas are reinforced. I didn't get a chance to mention this during the math part, but we meet with the students several times a week, and typically we will do one focus Zoom every week with regards to every subject area. So we meet with them for science in small groups or in larger groups on Zoom every week, and we'll talk about those cross-cutting concepts and talk about what they've been working on every day. So we kind of make sure that it's not just, hey, the experiment's done, it's put up on Seesaw, bye. It's, okay, what did you really discover? And what does that link to the next thing we're doing? Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you, Andrew. And Lauren, you want to tag on to that?
Oh my goodness. I don't know if I can like say anything more. I'm just praising you guys for doing NGSS in your elementary school. I'm so impressed. So yes, that is exactly what I was going to say. Just take this time to really focus on if you're an NGSS kind of background science person, the cross-cutting concepts are really like how the students are thinking about something. And that is so important, and it goes across all disciplines. And so taking the time to really explicitly teach those cross-cutting concepts and those science and engineering practices as they embed the core ideas as well into them is such a great way to do this from home. And like Andrew said, just finding things around the house that they can do. I was just working with a second grade teacher this week, and we were talking about what can they do with their body to understand science. And so that they can, you know, one of the things that we were talking about was fast and slow processes, and really just kind of diving in about the things that they experience. Like everyone has a human body available to them. So like what can you do to support students thinking about the things that they have around them? One of the things that I try to kind of remind people of is that students start thinking about science as soon as they enter the world. Like they have to be taught how to read, they have to be taught how to add and subtract. They start trying to figure out the things around them as soon as they get into the world. So it really is the thing that they're naturally going to gravitate towards when they are by themselves. And so I did put that there might be a link to a video that's really geared more towards parents of how you can support science at home, but it's so great to parallel that with teachers and while you're designing those lessons as well. So as much as you can fit those 3 dimensions of NGSS into your cohesive performance expectation lessons is great. Awesome.
Fantastic. And that brings us to secondary students. So science in the secondary, what are some of the best practices and strategies that you found for teaching science online with our secondary students? Stephanie, did you want to start us there?
I'd love to. I've been working with 6th graders for online for 12 weeks, and that's an interesting age group. And what's been most powerful, like, you know, my colleagues were talking about with elementary, is getting them to do things at home. That has been the most powerful experience, to see my 6th graders and creating that positive environment where we all set up our cameras so we can see what we're doing. And if students didn't have the materials, then they watched intently, and you could see them looking real close and helping catch mistakes or what's happening with so-and-so, and oh, look what's happening in so-and-so's screen. And empowering our students to support each other that way, encouraging those conversations of, well, I don't have that material. Well, what else could work? And my students, 6th graders, talking on a Zoom about, well, that might work because of this, and just doing science and creating that excitement through a screen is challenging, but doable. And that's been one of the most powerful things I've done to help organize it as a teacher. For me, we were doing some of the earth science standards and performance expectations around rock cycle and how the Earth's surface changes. And so I created a simple Padlet where I posted some example labs that students could choose from that were various types of materials, so that they could choose based on the materials they had at home or they thought they could manage. And they loved it. It was their Choose Their Own Adventure Lab Day. That was a big kick. My students also have been really responding well to quizzes. I really like that particular platform for quick check-ins on knowledge, because they can play it a million times. They now have power-ups, which middle schoolers really like, because they can like freeze everybody else. And just having that fun piece, so that when my kids come to science, it's like, we're in science and we're still doing science. And that's the most important thing I've found, is like making sure to still schedule and plan for kids to be able to do what we love, whether it's building a model out of ramen packages or building a model of unconformities from a pile of clothes. Modeling has been so successful to get kids creative about what they're using, and that just kind of ties in with getting them thinking and just using what they have around their house. That's been the most successful. I think one of the links that they're going to post, I've shared some of the different assessment pieces along with the performance expectations that we've been working through, and just really focusing on what do my kids really need to know to meet those expectations, and clearly defining that for the students has made them feel successful and be able to reach those goals very consistently.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, I shared that link in the chat. And just in case you didn't, we'll be sharing all the links also afterwards, after the call. So if you miss anything and it's too hard to keep up, don't worry. All the links to any resources that anyone shares will be shared with you also after our call. Lauren, did you want to also talk to us about NGSS and science in the secondary?
Absolutely. I could talk all day about NGSS.
That's what I thought.
So as from a high school perspective, I think the most important thing is because you have to, especially middle school and high school, you have students with potentially 8 different teachers looking at 8 different ways that teachers are organizing things. So going back to minimizing those distractions, if you can keep all of your stuff in one place, it is going to help your students immensely. And so what I worked on this with a science teacher at ASD. He's gone now. He's actually at KIS. But we worked on something called an anchor guide, and it literally walks you through day 1, and like there's a stop, don't go any further. Day 2, stop, don't go any further. And the most important thing with the anchor guide is to make sure that it's not pigeonholing the kids into one correct answer. And so, for example, the one that will be linked as a resource is one about how we can reduce human impacts on biodiversity and the environment. And so you can see in there's never anywhere that the student has to choose a certain human impact or a certain environment or a certain type of species. So leaving it as wide open as you can for them is super important at the high school level, because they need it to be real. Buy-in at the high school level is so important that it has to be real to them. It has to be relevant, and it has to be something they're passionate about. Another thing that I would advocate for is allowing them to have an authentic audience. You have parents that are at home right now that are engineers and doctors and lawyers, and you have engineers, doctors, and lawyers that aren't parents that are at home right now and could probably pop into your Zoom call with your kids to listen to to your students' ideas. And then that makes it so meaningful to them. So any way that you can really increase that level of authenticity and depth and relevancy for your high school students, the better. And then I think we're all kind of thinking about how we can just kind of prioritize things. And I know that we're going to get to that question afterwards, but looking at, for science, if you're looking at the science and engineering practices and the cross-cutting concepts that are the easiest and the most engaging to do at home, that's going to be the ones that you're going to be the most successful with. Another thing that Dana just linked are IEAs. That stands for Instructionally Embedded Assessments. So instead of, as much as you can, please default, or I would encourage you to default to the students building something or designing or researching or doing something throughout the unit, as opposed to preparing for a written individualized assessment at the end. So trying to mirror what you do in your classroom is just going to make it really, really difficult for you. You're going to run into technical difficulties and everything. So the more you can embed assessments into your instruction, the less of a cognitive load you as teachers are going to you're going to have as well.
Fantastic. And we did post those links, and I just want to put a plug in for, if you haven't checked out the Wonder of Science, the amount of resources that Paul Anderson has on there is just unbelievable. There are assessments, there are so many different components, and the generosity within that site as from the teacher end has just been unbelievable. Andrew, did you want to add something real quick? I noticed that you threw something in there real quick. Or no, I'm sorry, that's the next question. Never mind, I'm jumping ahead. Okay, for our next question, before we turn it over to the total Q&A, is given the pandemic and the curriculum challenges facing math and science departments, what is the best approach to curriculum in the fall, and how can we and what can be done between now and then to help our students be prepared? Because it's been bumpy. You know, some kids have access to internet, some don't. Some have, you know, great learning experiences. Some are struggling because of other issues. Stephanie, would you like to start us with that question?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, as Lauren was talking about that organization piece, I think that has been like my go-to like honing place, prioritizing the standards and really looking at which performance standards are like, you gotta really know it, and also at the same time thinking about, can students learn this and experiment with it and learn about it and do it at home. And so as we look forward, like looking at what does that look like, thinking about how to organize all of that information in one spot, not just for the teachers, but for the students as well. That has been really successful for this year with my kids, is having one running doc, and the new week's information is right at the top. So they know it's always there. Parents know where to find it if they're trying to support their middle schooler, because it's a transition year in grade 6. But that big piece of prioritizing, and not just what does it mean to do it as a science teacher, but for parents, and clearly defining what does it look like to be able to do this for our kids and for our parents, and thinking about that ahead of time so that we know that and are prepared for and have activities and options. If you're here, you can do this thing, or if you are here and you're learning, you can do this thing, and being prepared to meet our students where they are coming to us at, like we always do, and just maybe thinking a little bit more on the back end of defining those expectations ahead of time. I think I know for me, it will make me feel more confident as a teacher. That's kind of my plan moving forward.
Wonderful. Thank you. And Lauren, did you want to tag on to that?
Yeah, so just to add on to what Stephanie was saying about prioritizing standards, our school is starting to approach that conversation. And one thing that we did is we created a K-12 scope and sequence for NGSS. And to go back to what Dana was talking about with Paul's website, I believe at least HKIS, our school, and I think London maybe, all of those sequences are on the Wonder of Science. If you look at under schools, any school that Paul's worked with is on there. And then but from K to 5, that doesn't change for any school because they're specific for that grade level. From 6 to 8 is a grade band, and 9 to 12 is a grade band, but you can make, I guess, data informed decisions to see what is safe to cut and what is safe to move to the next year or backfill the next time, because there are things like, I believe it's stability and change. In one of the grade bands from K to 2, there's only one performance expectation in grade 2 that covers that. So it's really important to make those decisions based on, are you the grade level that's kind of like the end all be all in that grade band for that cross-cutting concept or for that SEP? And really remembering that NGSS is 3-dimensional. And so as teachers, we oftentimes try to think of the one dimension of content. And I would encourage you, I guess, when you're thinking of those scope and sequences and what can we cut and what do we need to move to the next year, is really think about all 3 dimensions, and because they're all equally important, and some things are more heavily in one grade band than the other. So that's just a way to just incorporate a 3rd data point when you're making those decisions.
Wonderful. And Jill, do you want to continue as well?
Yeah, thank you. I think it's interesting because I think math and science have such a similar respect for practices, right? And so to me, this is a great opportunity to make the shift in education from having the practices support content to content supporting practices. And so if we really are looking at, if we are starting to build our curriculums in the fall to really hone in on those math practices of being able to argue, being able to use tools appropriately, and I'm sure it's similar enough in science, then we've got this continuity that they've been doing enough, right? And so we can build activities that are really focused on that and then supplement with the content. I think we're also put into another great position where we think about, at the beginning of the year, we have these expectations of students, and then we kind of shift, like, where are they? Do we need to do we need to backtrack or not? And now we can kind of have this expectation of, we're all in different places, and let's try to build activities that are going to support people across the board. Again, really emphasizing the need to shift to those low floor, high ceiling activities. This is the push that we need to have, where students can do a problem that hits content standards, hits practice standards, and they can enter, it can be, there are tasks on ucubed.org that are for 3rd graders and 8th graders. And so if 3rd graders and 8th graders can do the same problem, then we don't need to worry about, oh, did we hit this one content area in math at the end of grade 6? They won't be ready for grade 7. We have to think about, what if a kid was sick? What would we do in that scenario, right? And so we do what we can. We work with the variable that we're given. And, I think that thinking more about how can we make curriculum that's more accessible at any entry level is really, really important. And this is the opportunity that we've been given to kind of reshift our thinking.
It's so important, such an important message. Thank you so much. I'm going to move us into the Q&A because I know Laura Benson's been monitoring our Q&A, and we have tons of questions coming in. And just so you know, like, we could easily do a webinar on just primary school math, primary school science, physics, biology. We are well aware. We appreciate that all of you are sharing your time, and there are so many different levels and ways we can go into all of this. So we appreciate your time, and we're trying to answer as many questions as we can. Laura, I'm going to turn it over to you so we can start to address some of those specific questions.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There are so many incredible questions, and they really represent a compass in steering our thinking beyond even this webinar. But for today, to tap into our panelists' wisdom and experiences, I'm going to cluster a lot of the questions into 2 chunks to give you guys a chance to think about this for a second. We have a lot of questions just about assessment and online assessments and assessments in math and science. What does that look like and sound like for you all in your current probably disrupted context? And then the other big theme I think that's running through the questions is around differentiation. So just how you're working to differentiate for all your students, or reflective of students with special needs, and just the idea of, through that differentiation, you guys have tapped into it and explained it beautifully with ideas like breakout rooms and just the collaboration that you so thoughtfully have incorporated into your own teaching. But let's start with the assessment question, and just jump in if you have some recommendations or thoughts to support the people on our webinar and those who will get to listen to it later around what's your best advice about assessment?
I would say for me, we have been doing more one-on-one Zoom meetings with the kids, kind of doing a pulse check with the kids,
Right.
rather than having them sit down with a paper test and record themselves or being, monitored. Having those important conversations with the kids about what did they learn, thinking about your essential questions that you've created for your units, and can they answer those essential questions.
Right.
And, I believe we need to be checking with our kids and not waiting until the very end of a unit or a topic. And because you will be able to see the growth with the kids, and not wait until the end and go, well, that didn't work. The other thing is having an open mind of how the kids are going to show you what they know. And, sometimes with our classes being all over the world, we need to have an idea of maybe the kids create a tutorial video for the rest of their peers, and their peers give them feedback during your class Zooms, or they create a tutorial, like a poster on Google Slides, and share it, and they can collaborate on that as well.
Yeah, I so agree, Emry. That idea that Doug Reeves talks about, we don't want the assessment to be an autopsy. We want to engage in formative assessment methodology so that we have time to respond to the children's ongoing growth and development, or any tangles that come along the way. So thoughtful. Thank you. Other thoughts about assessment, Andrew?
We're a big proponent of like having a platform to provide kind of real-time feedback. So like you said, so assessment doesn't become an autopsy. So it's more so there's a lot of focus on formative assessment and kind of giving kids feedback as the process goes.
Right.
Most of us have chosen one of two platforms to do, either Google or Seesaw in the third grade, and more so fourth and fifth, they've leaned towards Google Classroom. And that really gives an opportunity to make comments on the kids' work, whether it's editing an image they've made or something to that effect. And that way you can provide them with that feedback when necessary. The other thing that I personally do is my class has a Google Hangouts class group. So if someone needs me in the middle of the day because they're stuck with what they need to do, they can just say, hey, Mr. Hart, do you have a few minutes? And I'll just Zoom with them for 5 minutes, help them out, and then send them off on their way. And sometimes that's a 10-minute thing. And so between the two platforms, we're able to provide very consistent formative feedback. So when it does come time for a checkpoint or an assessment, you've already gathered most of your data before you even get there.
Yeah, and you've provided that just-in-time support. And then just the idea, I think, that you're available for students so thoughtfully. Like you said, it could be in a smaller, a little bit larger dose, but I think lessening the anxiety, and Emry, as you were saying, those one-on-one conversations. I heard you all mention such thoughtful ways of monitoring your students' growth and progress over time, and that's stirring people's thinking to want to hear more from you. Anyone else want to add in? Stephanie, how about your thoughts on assessment, please? Thank you.
The piece about students teaching other students, that has been a very powerful piece, using Flipgrid, something where they can record and then respond to each other when they have time, or to even be inspired by each other, has been a fabulous way of doing, instead of doing a written lab report, or to share their feedback or what they happened when they did their labs, have been a fabulous assessment piece to show me what they're understanding, and using platforms like Schoology integrated with Google Docs so that we're having a conversation. So even if they're responding to a performance task question, I can be in their doc and they're inviting me and say, well, come check this out. And we will talk about it together, and using that doc feature, using the chat in Zoom. Or some students are learning to be brave and just ask a question so everyone can hear, and we can all pause and talk about it. And so the biggest thing I think has been making the assessments to where the goal is that they're talking with me, and they're talking and sharing and questioning, and it's that progressive check-in has been really powerful to have that communication.
Absolutely. And I think you have been so thoughtful in nurturing active learning, all of you, that, as you say, if the kids are teaching, if one student's teaching another student, you have to really know your stuff. You have to be reflective, and you have to think of a way to say it. And using tools like Flipgrid grid and using the idea of Google Classroom and Seesaw. And just, you know, stepping out there and taking a chance. I think we're all policing ourselves and wanting this to be perfect by tomorrow, and it's new ground, new territory for all of us. So any other thoughts about assessment? Okay, well, let's move on to differentiation, which we're kind of bridging to, and you guys have mentioned some incredibly thoughtful ways that you're already, and that you regularly, I should say, are differentiating learning for your kids. But just what are some tips you can give the people listening in on our webinar today? Lauren, thank you.
Yeah, so I would definitely advocate for universal design for learning instead of trying to identify what's going to help this one student, really universally designing your instruction and your approach to online learning for all learners, and you're going to hit every single one of them. And if CAST is a great place to go for that. I didn't put that as a resource, but maybe that needs to be added as a resource. And just providing multiple means of them to engage, multiple means for them to represent their understanding. And I think if you start to unpack your standards, you'll realize that there's so much more freedom in the standard than we tend to gravitate towards assessing. So to give an example of science, when the performance expectation says develop a model, it doesn't say draw a model. It doesn't say build a model. It doesn't say explain through words. So there's multiple ways that you could allow students to develop a model. So as long as you're defaulting to universally designing for all learners, you will hit most of your learners, and then you might need to go in and provide some extra support for those one or two kids that just need that extra support. And one way that I did that for the Earth and Environmental Science thing is just go in and provide extra comments as they went along before they get to that task, and just say, just to clarify, this is what you're doing at this point. And that immensely helped with those students as well. So that's more at the high school level, but to kind of talk about that, Anne-Marie said at the very beginning, our students need to learn how to learn online. And when you open up so many different options with universal design for learning, they also have to become expert learners in that too. So providing a menu of choices for students, and if this is your first time doing it, they're going to need to be taught how to use that menu of choices in a way that is going to deepen their learning instead of increase the amount of extraneous load that they're having.
Right. Couldn't agree more. And I think it's a huge application and answer for elementary as well. We were just talking to our school in Cayman International School is doing a lot of work around UDL. So Dana, I'm just thinking we'll, just to let everyone know, we'll include and embed some UDL thinking in the follow-up notes that'll come to you after the webinar later today. Other thoughts about differentiation? Jill, thank you.
Yeah, I think it's really, the root is that you need to be flexible as a teacher. And I think Stephanie talked about this, where we need to meet students where they're at. And so recognizing that some students are really going to jump on this distance learning and others are really going to struggle. And so offering as many varieties of what's going to meet your objective as possible is really a way to kind of offer some varied work for students. So if I have an objective I'm trying to hit, I think I mentioned this before, but I will include a link to Khan Academy. I'll include some BuzzMath assignments. BuzzMath is a great interactive online math program that's 3rd grade through 8th grade. They're including 1st and 2nd next year, but that has got really deep understanding, really fun interactive problems, and it's free right now. And then I'll also have our regular lesson that's on Pear Deck that I can watch. I can walk them. I can see what they are doing. It's kind of like another formative assessment piece, and then I can kind of call them out. And so if students are having some trouble. So by offering all of these little extra moving pieces that students can do to show that they can meet their objective, that gives them some choice, right? But on top of that, we also can recognize that some students are just need a little bit of extra help and they want that interaction with you. And so I know it depends on your school, but I know for us, we have certain requirements for being synchronous, but the times that we're asynchronous, offering just, a drop-in Zoom session, sometimes that one-on-one or groups of 3. I know some schools aren't doing one-on-one, but just that, just having them talk it out and teach each other. I think Stephanie said that also through some of the work is really, really helpful.
That makes a ton of sense. Such thoughtful. Stephanie.
And I think too, like with middle school especially, and even though like my kids have MacBooks, because we're in an international school and that's one of our requirements, some of them are brand spanking new to having a computer. And so one thing that's, to help is just providing them those slow step-by-step teaching things for how to use the tech, even if it's the same tech we've been doing, having that anchored in an easy to find spot that's always in the same spot. So they know like, oh, if I get stuck, I can try this myself. And then also building in that encouragement for them to be brave, asking a question. It's okay to not know, and creating that sense of community is going to be really important to help support students helping each other.
Yeah, so compassionate, because even I think kids who were pretty savvy in using tech in our classrooms, just the new context and disruptions at home, and also the worry that's on their hearts. I think it's so thoughtful to step back and just take care of some of the pragmatics and shepherd kids in the most thoughtful ways. If they can use the tools that are available to them, it'll just go a lot better. And that kind of leads me to one last question point to gain some more wisdom from you all. And it's around the idea that has come up a lot already around inspiration. How are we inspiring students as math and science learners to utilize their knowledge, to go after resources they have in their homes and see them as possibilities for their science and math learning? So to close out our question time here, any thoughts about inspiration and motivation and efficacy? Anne-Marie.
Well, I have the opportunity to teach my own child middle school math. So as a parent and a teacher, we've been trying to utilize like you said, a lot of what we have here at home. Our kids are on their devices, for those who have devices, a lot during these. And we were talking earlier about Zoom fatigue, and it is for real, a real thing. And so I've been, as a parent and a teacher, I've been trying to come up with things that we could do here at home. For example, we were talking about volume of rectangular prisms. And so instead of just building something with Legos or, which is great, we actually went into the kitchen and we made cakes. And we talked about how we could slice this into different layers. And, so it was a win-win, as we were talking about. Yes. So we had 3 different cakes and we were slicing and dicing, and then she had to turn around and explain it to her dad how why this had anything to do with figuring out volume of rectangular prisms. But it goes back to, like you said, creating those environments and creating those opportunities and using things at home. And most of our kids will have flour and sugar and whatever in their kitchens. So getting the kids into the kitchen or outside to build a ramp like you guys were talking about, or outside to fly a kite and figuring out Pythagorean theorem. But just coming up with some things for all of our kids to be able to participate in, and in a creative environment.
Yeah, I think you guys are so brilliantly painting a portrait of possibility. Sometimes kids just don't know that they have permission, or their mind just hasn't had a chance to go there yet. So I think anything you can do to use the triggers, the wonderful invitation triggers you all mentioned, are such a big part of inspiration and motivation. Other thoughts about inspiration or motivation? Andrew and then Stephanie?
I think one of the big things that kind of was a bit of a game changer for me in this process was, while at the beginning, most of us were doing 2 larger class Zooms, like 11, 12 kids in a Zoom.
Wow.
And then I think what ended up happening was a lot of the kids wouldn't get their voices heard. And I think it's critical to have student voice even in this distance learning. So I and a bunch of us changed it up and ended up having, like, rather than doing one larger 40-minute, doing groups of 4.
Right.
For like multiple but shorter, but then you got to hear those quieter voices who had awesome things to contribute. And that ended up getting, like, because I did that, 3 or 4 of them in particular, who were the quiet ones in my room, they were submitting stuff more regular. They were talking through their problems more.
Yeah.
And that was a big deal in this time.
Yeah. Brilliant. Huge. Stephanie.
I think another thing that has been precious in my teaching and growing as a teacher has been using this opportunity to just share my vulnerabilities with my students, to do the labs and activities that I'm doing at home with whatever I find. If it doesn't work, that's science. It doesn't always work. What can we do and think through it, and modeling that thought process for my students and providing that as an opportunity and pointing out the cool things, and just like we would in the classroom, like creating those videos and moments in my living room, on my desk, to show them that they can do it too, and just being that positive, encouraging person that we all try to be in the classroom, and just getting that to come through the computer.
Yeah, and I think we are so blessed to have you all with us today, because you're demonstrating that you've set up an apprenticeship with your students, and as a fellow learner, and that idea of being vulnerable, you could just physically see the kids go, they relax, they're going to be more open. There's going to be times where learning is going to be hard, and you've just given them a release valve to honor that feeling and that reality. I'm going to throw it back to Dana now, but thanks everybody that's on the webinar. As an attendee or a panelist, we're incredibly edified by your energy and your dedication and your sharing. Thank you so much. Dana.
I just want to say thank you to all our panelists and also to all of the participants. You guys have been sharing amazing resources over here, which are amazing. And we're going to go through and try to, we'll put those together and organize those so that it's manageable, and be sharing those out with everybody. But really, all of us are learning together in all of this. And it's, we keep saying it's uncharted water and unprecedented times, but it really is. And I don't mean to overuse that expression, but together we're stronger when we help teach one another and help one another. And we all are coming at it with such different experiences. And I also know that all of us have our own unique needs, and we're trying to figure out how we can best meet those. And if we can't, we're trying to do the best that we can. And we really, so we're sorry if some of your questions didn't get answered, but we'll try to answer and continue to answer them the best that we can. I'm going to throw in the chat right now as well, everyone's Twitter accounts that was on here today, and some hashtags. You'll notice I'll post them twice, of the different Twitter chats that I follow to try to help me get information. And so those are a great way to try to find resources specifically around things that you need. If you're not used to using Twitter, I'll tell you what, it's an amazing way to find out information. Next week, we're going to be running a similar webinar and a similar structure with English and social studies. So please feel free to join us. And again, we'll be focusing with elementary, middle school, and high school teachers from all those different content areas, and just trying to figure out how we navigate those waters together. Thank you, everybody here. You guys were fantastic, and we really appreciate your time and energy. We know that you're juggling online courses, going back to school, not going back to school, figuring out where you're going to be for the summer. And if you're like me, just trying to figure out how you're going to get groceries at this moment. So thank you, everybody, and thank you for joining us again this week, and we'll be back with you next week. And thank you to everyone at ISS for supporting us in the background as well, and making sure that we can have these webinars. Bye, everyone, and we hope you have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day, no matter where you are. Thank you.